rongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere aki nei, crisis? What crisis? Hospitals are jammed and there's queues to see GPs, but the Minister in charge denies the health system is in crisis. Meanwhile, in East Auckland, residents are being forced to head to EDs because there's not a single 24/7 health clinic in the neighbourhood. Dear Fletcher Building, the Minister writes to the Jibboard giant asking it not to enforce its trademarks and sets up a task force too. So what's that actually going to change? The new Police Minister joins us. You may recognise him. And after 6 in world news, Thailand does a complete turnaround from banging people up on pot charges for years to legalisation.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon, I'm Karen McCarthy. The Nurses Organisation says the health system is in crisis, whether the government wants to admit it or not. Emergency departments in Auckland are being swamped, and the Wellington and Hutt Valley DHBs have been forced to delay planned care for weeks. Health Minister Andrew Little admits the system is under pressure, but has repeatedly denied it's in crisis. The Nurses Organisation's Kai Whakahaere, Kerry Nuku, couldn't disagree more.
To avoid saying that we're in crisis it just seems to be absolutely disrespectful to the health professionals that go to work every day, that care for patients every single day.
East Auckland residents say they've experienced lengthy delays at A&E. East Care in Botany services a population of more than 100,000 people, but does not have a 24-hour health centre. It falls into the county's Manukau catchment, one of the DHBs under immense pressure. This woman says it was an ordeal getting a doctor to see her.
I was sick. I had to go to Bakerfield in Manukau. They sent us back to East Care, and I was having a really bad headache. I couldn't even see and all that. And then I had to wait there for like 3-4 hours to get the urgent care. And that also had a long queue.
You can hear more about this on Checkpoint shortly. The Prime Minister says the national plasterboard shortage is a market failure. Fletcher Building currently holds about 95% of the local market with its Jib brand of plasterboard, but it hasn't been able to keep up with demand. The government has today announced a ministerial inquiry into the shortage. Jacinda Ardern says it isn't just another working group.
We have an issue here that cuts across far more than central government. This cuts across consenting issues, supply chain issues, supplier issues. What we're playing here is an interventionist role to try and resolve a problem that expands across a number of different areas.
The leader of the National Party says the building sector needs urgent help, not another ministerial task force. Christopher Luxon says National is willing to work with the government on passing a members' bill under urgency. He says the bill, put forward by his party's infrastructure spokesperson Andrew Bailey, would expedite the importation of plasterboard from Europe and the United States.
The bottom line for us is that we have builders and building companies going to the wall because they can't complete projects and they can't access Jib. It's an urgent issue, and sending an urgent letter and actually forming another working group or a task force or whatever you want to call it doesn't get the job done.
2 Give a Little pages have been set up to support the family who lost 7 members in a road crash near Picton on Sunday. The first, started by Lani Larson, has had more than $19,000 pledged so far. The money will go towards funeral expenses and medical costs. Another page, started by Scott Holland Healthcare, the employer of 2 family members who were not in the crash, has raised $670 so far. A 4th dose of COVID vaccine looks set to become available for some people soon. Parliament is now debating the Medicines Amendment Bill, which allows vulnerable New Zealanders to get their second booster shot 6 months after their first. The 4th dose would cover older people, aged care residents and those in disability care facilities. Health Minister Andrew Little says it won't be mandated, but it will be made available to anyone whose GP is prepared to prescribe it on an off-label basis.
This simply allows the Director-General, who would be required in terms of the amendment bill, to obtain appropriate advice, technical advice, which the Director-General would do, to allow the vaccine to be available on a broader basis.
Parliament is debating the bill under urgency, and the government hopes to have it passed by the end of the day. That's the news. In sport, new All Black Lester Faianga-Anuku believes he is ready for the physicality of international rugby. The versatile Crusaders back joined the All Blacks camp in Auckland today, along with 5 other newcomers. He acknowledges there'll be competition for places in the first Test team of the year to play Ireland, but says he's got something to offer.
Get told a lot, bit of a pinball out there, sort of throwing my body around, but I think when you know you're doing it for a good cause, taking one for the team, representing, your community, your people, and now at this level, a nation, just makes it more better to be able to understand that, let's throw a bit more at, whatever the D-line throws at you.
Meanwhile, the Highlanders have named Clark Dermody as head coach for the next 3 years. Dermody moves up from assistant coach to replace Tony Brown, who will join Japan ahead of next year's Rugby World Cup. All white and four-time A-League champion Costa Barbarouses is returning to the Wellington Phoenix on a 2-year deal. The 32-year-old started his professional career at the Phoenix in 2008 and went on to play 270 A-League matches for 3 other clubs. And Rugby League has banned transgender players from women's international competition following Global Swimming's decision to restrict trans athletes' participation at the elite level. International Rugby League says it will work with the 8 nations competing at the Women's World Cup in November to develop a transgender policy next year. And that's RNZ Sport.
Chaos in the hospitals.
We expected our peak on the flu season to either late June or July. This hit us pretty much the first week of June.
Chaos for commuters.
Trains that normally run every 15 minutes are now coming by the hour.
But a time for rest and contemplation is on the way.
Reflecting on our past, acknowledging the present, looking forward and casting our aspirations and being connected to our taio.
Matariki, a bright star. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
Lisa Owen is here with Checkpoint after the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Wednesday. For Northland, occasional showers, mainly in the east. Auckland and Coromandel, mainly fine. A few showers about Great Barrier Island and northern Coromandel Peninsula. Waikato to Kapiti Coast, including Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country, mainly fine, but a possible shower about Taihape and the Manawatu Ranges. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, showers gradually easing, clearing south of the Wairoa district tomorrow afternoon. Wellington and Wairarapa, a few light showers, clearing in the morning, fine breaks increasing. Marlborough and Canterbury mainly fine, but areas of cloud about the coast at times, and a few light showers for coastal Marlborough till tomorrow morning. For the remainder of the South Island, fine, apart from fog or low cloud in some valleys. It'll be frosty overnight, and the Chatham Islands often cloudy with a few showers. RNZ National, it's coming up to 5:07. We'll have headlines later this hour.
Nā mihi, Karen. Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Crisis? What crisis? As hospitals and GPs around the country say they're cracking under the pressure, the Minister in charge denies the health sector is at crisis point. Primary carers in hospitals nationwide say chronic staff shortages mean they're overloaded, fatigued and struggling to cope. And it's a vicious circle, with GP practices swamped. More and more people are turning up to EDs. There's already an urgent investigation into the death of a woman who left Middlemore ED due to long wait times, and now hundreds of non-urgent surgeries have been pushed back in Wellington. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
A Wellington woman says the Middlemore death had scary similarities to her own experience at the local ED 3 weeks ago. Suffering a headache so severe she couldn't move, she was taken to hospital in an ambulance. She ended up being left in the ED hallway in discomfort for 7 hours before being seen by a doctor.
We were told that we would get a hospital bed and that's when the neurologist would see me. So I was just sort of waiting for a hospital bed. I was just like checking people who were leaving and being like, oh, is it my turn now? Every now and then they would squish my bed up so more people could be jammed in the hallway. It was chaos.
She never saw a neurology specialist. Instead, she says she was seen by a doctor, given pain relief and discharged 11 hours later at 2:30 in the morning. The severe headaches have persisted, but she's chosen not to sit and feel ignored and like a burden at hospital.
So I've just not bothered and just been in intolerable pain.
Capital and Coast DHB says it's experiencing higher numbers turning up at emergency departments. At the moment, an average of 175 each day in Wellington, along with high rates of staff absenteeism. Health Minister Andrew Little denies there's a broader crisis.
Every hospital scales back planned care every winter. There's nothing unusual about that. We have a system that is under pressure. We know Middlemore is under pressure. We know Capital and Coast is under pressure. We know Canterbury is under pressure.
We are in a crisis, whether or not the government wants to admit it or not. The nurses very clearly are indicating that we are in crisis mode.
Nurses organisation Kai Whakahare Kiri Nuku says direct warnings from health professionals have gone unheeded.
To avoid saying that we're in crisis it just seems to be absolutely disrespectful to the health professionals that go to work every day, that care for patients every single day.
Mr Little says the government has funded an extra 4,000 nursing positions, but couldn't say how many have been filled. And an admission the pressures now are greater than what had been predicted and planned for.
When you're planning with a health system and you're working off the data that you've got and building your models that you've got, no one is going to predict the future with accuracy, but everybody did the appropriate level of planning. The modelling showed a series of events that have happened earlier than expected.
National's health spokesperson Shane Ariti is incredulous the minister is denying any crisis.
He is dreaming. Show me one ED, show me one DHB that is not in crisis. One. Just choose on anyone and convince us that the health system is coping. He is wrong.
He says the severe staff shortages and pressures from COVID in the winter flu season have long been obvious.
What's the epiphany of what we're seeing now that we maybe didn't know a year ago?
The government and health authorities are urging people to do what they can to stay well to help ease the pressure, including getting the flu vaccine.
Meanwhile, East Auckland residents say they've been bounced between clinics and waiting hours on end for urgent after-hours healthcare. The population in the area is well north of 100,000 people, but there's not a single 24/7 health centre servicing locals, who instead head to an already overloaded Middlemore. The local MP for Botany, opposition leader Chris Luxon, says his call to reinstate funding for a local overnight service has fallen on deaf ears. Here's our reporter Nick Trubridge and cameraman Nick Monroe.
A slice of Auckland easily bigger than Dunedin, without a single round-the-clock overnight medical centre for those in desperate need. Mammoth wait times putting health issues off, giving up and going home, all the norm nowadays in Tamaki Makoto's east.
The wait is just terrible, the wait times, and especially for the population that is growing now as well.
Undoubtedly they haven't kept up with the population growth.
Waiting time is too long, and sometimes, I feel so sorry for the people who are sick.
So many people around here, thousands of people, not enough just Middlemore Hospital. Just one.
Residents today telling Checkpoint the health system in their neck of the woods, particularly when it comes to urgent and round-the-clock care, can no longer cope. One young mum today telling us about her ordeal while experiencing severe headaches.
I had to go to Bakerfield in Manukau. They sent us back to East Care, and I was having a really bad headache. I couldn't even see and all that. And then I had to wait there for like 3-4 hours to get the urgent care. And that also had a long queue. So I think, and the Bakerfield said that we're full, so we can't take you. Either you can wait for 6 hours or something. So
I'm standing outside East Care, near the Auckland suburb of Botany Downs. Now, this used to be where East Aucklanders could come if they needed urgent overnight medical care, but no longer. Now the only option is here, Middlemore Hospital. It's over a 20-minute drive away from East Care. It's a 35-minute drive away from suburbs further out, take Beachlands for example. And as we know, the ED behind me is already severely overloaded. It was back in 2020 when Counties Manukau DHB cut funding for East Care's overnight service. We're still waiting to hear why that was done and whether it'll be reversed. In the meantime, it's closed from 11 p.m. until 7 a.m. East Care CEO Gordon Armstrong at the time said the clinic was the highest volume provider of overnight primary care in Auckland. So now roughly 140,000 people, the estimated population within the Howick local board boundaries, are being funnelled through Middlemore. Locals in Botany today sharing their experiences as the local population's boomed, whilst urgent care services have done anything but.
I have to go to Middlemore, unfortunately, which is hard with little ones because it's, it's not close, not local, and we've got A&E right there that used to be 24 hours, so it'd be awesome if it could resume that.
Others on these eastern streets telling us Middlemore, the only option in the middle of the night, often gets clogged with those unable to afford the cost of going to the GP.
I don't want to spend the $20, and then they said, okay, after hours I will go to Middlemore Hospital. I'd make it too busy, and some people really in need, they can't get the health support from there.
But, as we've just heard, Health Minister Andrew Little doesn't believe issues like those in Auckland's East are symptomatic of a healthcare crisis. He does, however, concede the East Auckland situation is problematic. Botany MP and National leader Chris Luxon says he's taken the lack of overnight service in his patch all the way to the top.
It's about $300,000 or $400,000 and it would take the load out of Middlemore. At the time, Middlemore said, no, we've got this all under control. We've got our emergency department functioning just superbly well. But I think what we're seeing is actually funding those primary health organisations to provide those emergency services is a good thing. You know, it actually keeps people away from the ED department. So that's been our argument for some time.
In the meantime, those who fall unwell overnight are forced to make the commute south, past the spot they used to be able to drop in.
Either you wait at home and just otherwise go to Middlemore and wait there for 3-4 hours.
Over 100,000 people, not a single overnight service. Another symptom of a health system looking increasingly unwell.
And if you are listening to that on radio, the video version of that story from our two Nicks will go up on our webpage. It is 5:15. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Fletcher Building is being asked not to enforce its jib board trademarks for at least a year to help ease the supply crisis. Fletcher's controls about 95% of the plasterboard market and holds several trademarks protecting certain colour shades exclusively for its jib products. The Construction Minister's written to the company asking it to publicly state it won't take action against anyone breaching its trademarks, opening the way for more plasterboard imports. Megan Woods also announced a task force of industry representatives to troubleshoot supply problems.
So the purpose of writing that letter was to say, look, we know that you want to be part of finding solutions at the moment. I'm just seeking your assurance you're not applying that trademark at the moment and that you won't be in the near future. They've given me that assurance they're not and that they won't be until May 2023.
They haven't taken any legal action, so why do you need to write to them asking them not to take legal action?
That was exactly the point I was saying, we were seeking their assurance that they weren't at the moment and that they wouldn't be in the future. And it's really good to get that assurance that they won't be applying that until 2023. I just want to make sure that all of the levers are being pulled to ensure that we can get alternative product in so that we can get plasterboard back into the hands of builders.
Minister, have they officially given you an assurance?
Yes, they have. They've written back to me.
OK. Do you know for sure that the trademark was in fact stopping imports?
Look, it's one of the things that has been raised with me is one of the things that structurally can be seen as a way why some other products can't enter the market. I mean, there's a reason why companies take out trademarks, and that's to protect their IP and their position. But I think everybody, including Fletcher's, agree at the moment that now is not the time to be enforcing that trademark.
But you don't know for sure whether that in fact has stopped any imports?
Oh, look, the advice I have is that that is one of the barriers that potentially could be there. We need to ensure that we're not having any of those barriers in place at the moment. We need to be pulling every lever we can to ensure we're getting alternative plasterboard products into the country. I don't think anyone would agree that a company having a trademark on a colour would be a particularly useful thing to be enforcing at the moment.
You say you want some fast solutions from the task force, so what exactly are they going to do and by when?
So the people that we've been working with already have containers filling up with plasterboard from other countries. So Shane Brearley has been filling up containers, 28 containers I understand as the last time I checked in with Shane earlier today, that have been filled and plasterboard will be on the way. I'll be meeting with them next week. The next step is to us to work out whether there are actually real barriers in terms of some other products that could come into the country. New Zealand uses plasterboard in a slightly different way than a lot of other jurisdictions in terms of we use it as a bracing element in building, whereas a lot of other countries, they use it more as a lining. So we need to ensure that we've got the right structures in place to ensure that the certifications and the sign-off can be there so New Zealanders can be sure that they're getting product quickly, but it's the right product and that it's safe product.
Simplicity was importing products, well, before this task force. That was something they were doing anyway. So this task force, do you imagine that there's going to be any change to laws or regulations as a consequence of pulling these people together?
Look, actually, in bringing these people together is actually something a number of the people that suggested would be a good way for us to break through on this, that we have a forum.
What do you mean by breakthrough, Minister?
So that where we find that there are impediments to bringing in other products, that we can deal with that in an expedited way. So if there is a problem in terms of time it takes to get a new product certified for as being a substitution product, because that's one of the critical things here. We can think ahead and we can not specify jib as a particular product in future consents, but the fact of the matter is we have tens of thousands of consents that do have specified jib product in them at the moment. So the critical thing and the first job we have to do is make sure that we've got good substitution product.
And hasn't MB already done that, Minister? They put out a list of plasterboards. Auckland Council says it's already been making those substitutions, and advice has gone out to local authorities with all the information about which plasterboards they can substitute.
Yeah, absolutely right. That guidance has been issued to the building consent authorities. Auckland has done a really good job in picking that up. But what we also need is more supply coming in, so that we do have the ability to do some substitutions, but it's in working with partnership with people like Shane Brearley at Simplicity, with the other people that are on the task force, that will ensure that we actually get those containers filled with plasterboard that is certified, that is right for using in New Zealand, and that we can get it into our builders' hands.
So you're talking about importing being the solution here. I notice on your task force there's no one in manufacturing. So what about local business and encouraging more manufacturing?
So that certainly will be one of the medium to long-term solutions. There is a company in New Zealand that does recycling of old plasterboard and makes a new recycled product out of it. That's certainly something that is certified and ready to go in New Zealand. What we also have underway is, of course, the market study into building products. So this is about the kind of solutions that we need over the next 2-3 months. What we do know is that we have jib building its own new factory. That will be online next year, but building factories and getting manufacturing underway takes a lot longer time frame than the solutions we're looking for with this task force. That's not to say those medium and long-term solutions aren't important too, but at the moment, what we have to do is ensure that we have enough plasterboard in the hands of our builders so they can get on with the job of building houses that we need.
Can you give me a date, please, for when they're going to report back to you about what any changes they recommend?
Oh, look, there won't be a final report as such. What my expectation is that as we identify issues that need to be dealt with, we'll deal with them. I'll be having my first meeting with this group next week and pulling them together. This isn't going to be waiting for a final report with recommendations that then Cabinet considers. It will be an ongoing problem. Let's find what the roadblocks are, and let's see if there is an opportunity to fix them.
Minister Megan Woods there, and in a statement, Fletcher's says it's issued non-exclusive royalty-free licences to 10 parties to use the colour system to help them bring in plasterboard. And there's nothing stopping other plasterboard manufacturers from using a different shade of blue, mauve or green, should they choose to. It is 23 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Do get in touch. Let us know about 24/7 healthcare in your area. Is there somewhere you can go after hours? Are you forced to go to an ED? Particularly interested to hear from you if you're in East Auckland and having to use Middlemore. Also interested in your thoughts on the Minister launching a task force on plasterboard. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoints@rnz.co.nz. Time for the headlines now. Ko Karen anō tēnei.
The Health Minister, Andrew Little, is denying there's a crisis in the health system, but admits the pressure on hospitals and GPs is now greater than they had planned for. But primary carers and hospitals nationwide say chronic staff shortages mean they are overloaded, fatigued and struggling to cope. Meanwhile, the National Party says New Zealanders are suffering because of the government's failure to staff a health workforce that's now in crisis. Dr Shane Reti says there have been stark warnings over a long period. The Construction Minister has asked Fletcher Building not to enforce its Jibboard trademarks for at least a year to help ease the supply crisis. Megan Woods told Checkpoint they've assured her they've not and won't until May 2023. The Minister has also announced a task force of industry representatives to troubleshoot supply problems. The government has passed legislation which allows New Zealanders to get a fourth dose of the COVID-19 vaccine. The changes to the Medicines Act will allow vulnerable New Zealanders to get their second booster 6 months after their first. The amendment will allow COVID boosters to be given off-label by a GP, meaning without a prescription. And 2 Give a Little pages have been set up to support the family who lost 7 members in a road crash near Picton on Sunday. The money will go towards funeral expenses and medical costs. Those are the headlines.
Kia ora rā iho. Rock bottom consumer confidence has economists talking about the R word, recession. The Westpac McDermott Miller Consumer Confidence Index out today shows consumers have never been as hesitant since the survey began 34 years ago. Sam Molly reports.
The index fell 13 points in the June quarter to just under 79. To put that into perspective, confidence was higher during the recession of the early 1990s and the global financial crisis in 2008 and 9.
Sends a much stronger signal than just a risk of a recession. It does say that odds on now are a recession. It's a question of when, not if.
Infometrics principal economist Brad Olsen expected the index results to be bad, but not this bad.
The fact that it is at its lowest on record, by a considerable margin as well, is grim reading for the economy. It's actually quite shocking just how bad households currently think things are and how bad households think things are going to get.
He says the survey rings pretty serious alarm bells.
And realistically does start to say, wow, this has turned a corner. After 2 years of the pandemic, a lot of stimulus spending to keep the economy going, we are very much at a point where the economy looks like it's turning.
Finance Minister Grant Robertson not reading into the index as much.
You know the old story, you put 10 economists in a room and you get 13 opinions.
Does he expect a recession?
That's still not the forecast that we're receiving. Obviously, internationally, there is concern about recession in different countries, but the consensus forecasts remain that that's not the case, but those forecasts get updated regularly now.
Today's results show the 1,500 people surveyed were mostly worse off than they were 3 months ago, and their finances mostly deteriorated in the past quarter, and most people thought economic conditions would be bad in the next year and the next 5 years. The number of people who thought it was a good time to buy a big household item fell nearly 18 percentage points. Retail NZ Chief Executive Greg Harford says sales are rocky, to say the least.
Our members are telling us through our retail radar research that actually they're not confident that they're going to be hitting their sales target. Many are not confident that they're going to be here in 12 months at all.
Westpac's senior economist Satish Ranchod agrees.
Retailers are going to be facing a lot of pressure over the coming months. We're seeing pressure on household budgets that's dampening spending. We're also seeing no relief on the cost side.
Eurotech Design imports and distributes appliances. Managing Director Sophia Bristow has seen sales drop this year, but she says it's unclear whether it will take months or years to improve.
We are hoping for a short and sharp correction and a soft landing. We've got to be mindful that we do not talk ourselves into a recession.
At the same time, freight costs have gone up significantly over the pandemic, her purchase costs have gone up too, and the business has been affected by labour shortages in Aotearoa.
We had no choice and we were very reluctant but to actually pass the increase on to our customers.
The index says consumer confidence has likely dropped because of increased costs of living, such as rising rent, food and petrol prices, as well as rising mortgage rates. The index shows Southland, Auckland, Northland, Canterbury and Waikato had the biggest drops in confidence. Hamiltonians are feeling it.
I know people are suffering. I've got a car, but the cost of running it, big lot of money for that too. Price of petrol, price of food, just everything.
Inflation's much higher, virtually every other country in the OECD. We're not doing too badly, but I'm really stuck on purely on the superannuation. So It's certainly incredibly tough.
We're okay, but I've always been very frugal.
There are two regions backing the trend. The index showed consumer confidence was up 2.5 points in Wellington and nearly 9 points in Gisborne and Hawke's Bay.
And let's get to some of your feedback now on the health system. This listener says our rural town is very short of GPs. An elderly man was very unwell but not needing hospitalisation. His daughter was told by the GP surgery he could not be seen for a week. If she was concerned to call an ambulance, surely counter to stretched ambulance and A&E services. A competent resource GP service could have prevented a waste of services. Someone from Dunedin points out there's no 24-hour medical service in Dunedin either. Shane in Hastings says Andrew Little is handing the election to National on a silver platter. But if you think health is in crisis now, wait until National's tax cuts and underfunding put the final nail in the coffin. And this one, I work in a surgical ward in Christchurch Hospital, which now has many medical patients. In one 16-hour period last week, 6 of my colleagues each worked 12-hour shifts. This is unsustainable, they say. Do get in touch. Let us know whether you think the health system is in crisis or not. You can text us on 2101 or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. A massive floating restaurant that was a famous landmark in Hong Kong has sunk after it was towed from the harbour, where it operated for nearly 50 years. The 80-metre-long 3-storey jumbo floating restaurant closed in 2020 and a few days ago was towed from the city. In its heyday, it was a favourite dining spot for the rich and famous and was used as a set for movies. More than 3 million guests are believed to have eaten its Cantonese cuisine over the years, including the Queen, Tom Cruise and Richard Branson. Just a week ago, it was towed away with its owners saying it would be moved to a lower-cost site for maintenance. Well, the company says it encountered adverse conditions in the South China Sea. Water entered the vessel and it began to tip. No one was injured, but efforts to save the vessel failed. Aberdeen Restaurant Enterprises says it was very saddened by the incident and it's seeking more details from the towing company. Whoa, that is a massive restaurant if you can see the pictures. Not looking too tidy at the moment. It is 29 minutes to 6. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National and it's time to get to the business news. Ko taku hoa NINA, ko Nicholas Poynton, who joins me in the studio. Okay, let's talk about conflicts of interest, right? Because there's a bit of heat over this. RBNZ and the Finance Minister taking some heat over the management of conflicts of interest. Tell us more.
Yeah, this all centres around Roger Finlay. So he chairs the board for New Zealand Post, and New Zealand Post just happens to be the biggest shareholder in Kiwi Bank, which is also supervised by the Reserve Bank. And Roger Finlay was contracted to do some consulting and advisory work for the RBNZ on its new governance structure, which comes into effect next month. And he's also he's soon to be appointed to the board as well. And that raised a few eyebrows. A former RBNZ senior official, Michael Riddell, didn't mince his words. He says the appointment by Mr. Finlay by the Finance Minister wasn't just inappropriate, it was outrageous. He says it's unthinkable to think a person from a private bank, which is supervised by the RBNZ, would then end up having a role with the central bank. In his view, this dynamic was untenable. He says that Mr. Finlay needs to resign from one of these positions, and he made the point that this wasn't necessarily an indictment on Mr. Finlay's expertise. It was more about the precedent and the message that it sent, and he's sort of racking his brains because he couldn't think of any other situations overseas where there was a similar dynamic. But in their defence, the Reserve Bank did put out a statement today to us saying that it was aware of these conflicts from the very beginning. They say that they've been managed from the start, and they did say that Mr. Finlay does offer invaluable experience. And the Finance Minister also put out his own statement mirroring what the RBNZ said, saying that Mr. Finlay's appointment was considered by the RBNZ in line with its new legislation. Look, I think you have to sort of take the RBNZ, we have no choice but to take the RBNZ and the Finance Minister at their word. It is sort of a strange circumstance they find themselves in, given the importance of the RBNZ. It's the arbiter of monetary policy, plays a very important supervision role. And you would think that trust and confidence in that position is imperative. You wouldn't want to be seen doing anything that could be seen to be undermine that perception. So, look, we'll just have to see what happens from here and whether or not Mr. Finlay will respond to Mr. Riddell's calls to maybe resign from one of those positions.
Yeah, it's interesting because even in, say, the Cabinet Manual, it's not just conflicts of interest, it's perception of a conflict of interest as well that matters. Let's move on to Contact, right? It's cutting emissions at the Waikato generator.
Yeah, this is its site in Te Rapa, a gas-powered station. It has primarily provides electricity and steam to Fonterra at its nearby processing facility, and surplus power is often sent to the grid as well. But they say that the current supply agreement it has with Fonterra going to expire in June 2023, and they say that's a great opportunity to actually decommission this site. So the boiler at this particular generator, that's going to be sold to Fonterra. It still has a need and a purpose for that, but the actual gas turbine, that's going to be retired. And Contact is saying that this is really just in line with its broader strategy to not just decarbonise its business, but also decarbonise the economy, as it puts it. And they say this is going to slash its own long-term emissions by about 20%, about 200,000 tonnes of carbon emissions taken out of the atmosphere. And we're probably going to see more of this in the years to come as we move away from fossil fuel generation of our electricity. This probably won't be the first time, but it's not often we do see a decommissioning of a generator that does rely on fossil fuels. It is worth mentioning, though, that the site in Te Rapa in the Waikato region employs about 16 people. Contact says that some of those people may be given the opportunity to work for Fonterra to manage its boiler. Others may be given the opportunity to be redeployed, as they put it, within Contact. However, there's no guarantee that all these people in their current jobs will be there beyond June 2023.
Yes, so there are consequences.
Yep. There is indeed.
Okay, Nicholas, shall we take a trot around the markets?
Yes, the NZX is up 1% or 113 points to 10,702. The dollar is trading at 63.3 US cents, 90.1 Australian and 51.6 British pence.
Thanks, Nicholas. Nicholas Poynton with Business News there. A central Auckland fire station's been closed 9 times this year because of staff shortages. It was lights on, nobody home this weekend at the Unihunga station, and it's not the only station forced to close because there's not enough firefighters to cover shifts or safely operate appliances. So what happens if your house goes up in flames and your neighbourhood station is closed for business? Well, joining us now is Watty Watson from the Firefighters Union. Kia ora, Watty. Can you talk us through, how many stations recently have been closed? Can you name us a few from the list?
Oh, wow, Lisa, it's pretty routine at the moment, particularly in the weekends. In Auckland, there is always a massive staffing problem, and in Wellington, it's the same. Pororoa in particular, that station, which is one of the busiest in the Wellington district, that was closed for 48 hours this weekend. It's happened in Dunedin. It's happened in Christchurch. We've had not enough crews in Gisborne. We've had trucks offline in Nelson. This is just becoming routine rather than extraordinary or exceptional.
So why? Why is it happening?
Well, there's a number of reasons, but the first reason is that FENZ just fails to employ enough firefighters to keep literally bums on seats for those trucks. And that is a ratio problem. So FENZ, like every employer, needs to employ enough people so that there is cover for when someone's on their planned annual leave, when they're on secondments, when they're in training, and then when they're in long-term leave and illness, including occupational cancers and occupational injuries. So they currently only employ 4.5 firefighters for every firefighter position, and they know, and they have told us, that they know that is far too low, that it needs to be at least firefighters for each position, and we think possibly a bit higher.
So are there recruitment issues? Do people want to be firefighters?
Oh, actually, FENZ cancelled a recruit course in April this year. They'll say it wasn't cancelled, it was postponed. It's just a lot of rubbish. There are normally 4 recruit courses a year, and at that financial year there was only 3. They've only guaranteed 2 for the next financial year. I got texts this week, actually, from 3 different people telling me that they had got through the whole recruitment process only to be told that they wouldn't be put on a course. And that was probably the April course. So people still want to be firefighters, but there is a massive problem about the starting wage for those firefighters. We have recruited firefighters who literally drop 40, 50K from their job or career before they take up that service in order to train. And then they're still barely making a minimum wage for the first few years as a firefighter.
Watty, your cell phone is just flicking in and out a little bit, and I want to hear this. Can you tell me what the starting salary is for a firefighter, please?
So the starting salary for a firefighter is the adult minimum wage, and they work 42 hours a week, but they're having to work way more than that just to pay the bills. In addition, they're having to work way more than that in order to keep the trucks on the run. So they are poorly paid, yet other people in SENS are paid more reasonably. For example, there are admin jobs, and we have no disrespect for admin at all, it's necessary. But there are admin jobs in, for example, regional offices who are being paid more as their salary for less hours a week than a station officer with, who's probably got 18 years as a firefighter and has huge responsibility.
Right, I know you're locked in a battle over wage negotiations at the moment, and people will be interested in that, and they also want to know, Watty, what happens if they live around the corner, for example, from the Onehunga fire station, and their house happens to catch on fire. What happens? Who comes and puts it out if the station is closed?
If that station is closed, the truck has to come from another station, and it depends where the nearest stations are and what they're undertaking at the time, whether they're out on a job or another emergency. So minutes cost lives, and it's really, really important that the firefighters get there, particularly for a fire, particularly for a residential or a fire where someone could be inside, persons reported. They need to be there as quickly as they can. SENS's own promotional information to encourage people to have fire alarms talks about 3 minutes being the difference between life and death. The fire stations are located strategically so that they can get within their response areas as quickly as possible. So when they're not in their primary response area, when they have to come from somewhere else, can be just a few minutes, or it could be 10 minutes, or it could be longer, depending where they are coming from.
So you're saying lives are being put at risk, Watty, by these staff shortages?
Absolutely, absolutely. SENS is rolling the dice, and they are rearranging the chairs on the Titanic. What they're doing, and in Auckland this happens almost every weekend, there are a number of stations that are closed because there's simply not enough firefighters. And what happens then is they take those trucks offline and they move a truck from another area into that station. That means the area that truck came from is either closed, or it is a truck down, or it is a different appliance. So, for example, in the weekend, Remuera had a aerial appliance cover at Remuera. Now, it was too big to get through many of the streets, and it also meant that Auckland high-rises were left without an aerial that would normally have responded to.
Really appreciate your time this evening, Watty. That is Watty Watson, who's from the Professional Firefighters Union. It is 18 minutes to 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai Ofakaro, let us know your thoughts on that one too. A number of fire stations closed intermittently as staff have moved around to keep the numbers up. Onehunga was closed over the weekend. Text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or our email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Ane a Karen mina pita pita kōrero.
The Nurses Organisation says the health system is in crisis, whether the government wants to admit it or not. Emergency departments in Auckland are being swamped, and the Wellington and Hutt Valley DHBs have been forced to delay planned care for weeks. In East Auckland, residents say they've faced lengthy delays at A&E, while local emergency departments buckle under pressure. East Care in Botany services a population of more than 100,000 people, but does not have a 24-hour health centre. One young mum told RNZ it was an ordeal to even see a doctor while she was experiencing severe headaches. The leader of the National Party says the building sector needs urgent help, not another ministerial task force. Christopher Luxon says National is willing to work with the government on passing a members' bill under urgency. He says the bill put forward by his party's infrastructure spokesperson Andrew Bailey would expedite the importation of plasterboard from Europe and the United States. A senior economist says rock-bottom consumer confidence rings recession alarm bells. The Westpac McDermott Miller Consumer Confidence Index has fallen 13 points in the June quarter to the lowest level since the survey began 34 years ago. Infometrics principal economist Brad Olsen says it rings some pretty serious alarm bells. And a central Auckland fire station has been closed 9 times this year because of staff shortages. Wattie Watson from the Firefighters Union told Checkpoint it's happening at stations across the country and is becoming routine rather than exceptional. Those are the headlines.
Ngā mihi, the biggest rail strike in the UK in 30 years will go ahead this week, with services across the country affected. As the cost of living crisis starts to bite, the union is seeking a pay rise of at least 7% for its workers. But the rail bosses are offering less than half of the claim, while the government has described the unions as outdated. The BBC's Katie Austin reports.
People heading home this evening were catching some of the last trains before much of the network grinds to a halt in the biggest national rail strike in 3 decades. Last-ditch talks between rail bosses and the RMT union this afternoon ended without a settlement. The RMT has rejected a pay offer worth 3%.
Faced with such an aggressive agenda of cuts to jobs, conditions, pay and pensions, the RMT has no choice but to defend our members industrially and to stop this race to the bottom.
The rail industry is under pressure to save money after the pandemic hit passenger numbers and revenue, and billions of taxpayers' money kept services running. Rail bosses and the government want the RMT to agree to reforms and more modern ways of working.
If we're able to bring those modern practices into the way we do and run the railway, that could save hundreds of millions of pounds, and that could be transferred into savings and a better pay offer we could put on the table.
Up to 40,000 members of the RMT are due to walk out on 3 days this week. They work for 13 train companies, for example, guards and cleaners, and at Network Rail, which maintains and operates the railway across England, Scotland and Wales. Its staff include signallers.
Signalling staff are crucial to be able to run any trains at all on the tracks, and even with contingency measures in place, about half of Britain's rail network will be completely closed tomorrow, Thursday and Saturday. Where trains can run, there'll be a very limited service and only between about 7:30 in the morning and about 6:30 in the evening. Portsmouth is one of the places that will have no trains at all on strike days.
Josh takes the train to work as manager of this pub in Portsmouth city centre because he finds parking difficult and fuel prices have gone up. He'll have to drive this week and is worried the business will suffer if customers who can work from home.
I think we're going to be losing about 30% of our normal trade, and a lot of that is because a big part of our trade is commuters. Unfortunately, I'll have to cut back on my staffing levels, which, that's another hit for my staff.
Also affected by the strike are some pupils taking GCSE and A-level exams this week, including those at this college in Hereford, where 600 students usually travel in by train.
We spend 2 years often more trying to prepare students and give them the confidence, and to have this slap in the face at this point, it makes it very, very difficult.
The knock-on effect of strike days will mean a reduced service on Wednesday, Friday and Sunday too, and tomorrow a walkout on the London Underground will mean added disruption for the capital. Labour and the unions have called on ministers to intervene to try and solve the dispute. The Transport Secretary today again insisted that wasn't his place.
The employers have the facility to be able to negotiate what are complex and detailed 20 different areas of reform that are required. There's no way that a minister could step into that discussion and be any help.
Tomorrow's industrial action is now confirmed. The question now is whether more will follow.
It's 12 minutes to 6. Kia mau tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. The new police minister acknowledges crime statistics will be a partial measure of whether he's making a difference in the job. Chris Hipkins has taken over from Poto Williams, who was moved on following heavy criticism from the opposition and a flare-up in gang violence and youth-driven ram raids in the Auckland area. The Prime Minister declaring the narrative around the portfolio had become distracting. I asked the police minister about getting the call-up for the job. When the Prime Minister approached you, did you go, yippee, I want to be the police minister, or was it some kind of different reaction?
Oh, with all of these things, there's always a bit of backwards and forwards with the PM when she's considering a reshuffle. But police is something that I do feel quite strongly about. I've got a lot of time for the New Zealand Police. I think that the work that they're doing is incredibly important. I think the work they've been doing around culture change within the police is incredibly important, and I really want to be able to support them to continue to do that work. And I acknowledge that there are some areas where we're seeing escalating tension and escalating pressure at the moment. Gang crime is clearly one of them. Some higher visibility youth crime is clearly another. And so I think I think I can help, and I'm really looking forward to the challenge.
So, given that you're acknowledging that gang crime is a problem, is that your number one priority right now?
Certainly, it's in the top group of priorities, immediate priorities. I think we do have to recognise that in recent times, in the last few years, there's been an escalation in gang tension and gang-related activities, and I think that is something that community are rightly concerned about. And so, yes, that does have to be right at the top of the list.
Right. Well, you've been talking a lot about whether the police need more powers, and you've mentioned that you're having discussions with the Justice Minister about a package potentially of legislation or changes. Covering what? Give us a bit more detail.
Look, I mean, I'm not going to get into the detail of that until I've had the opportunity to actually... Well, until I've had the opportunity to get into it myself, but I will be going through that. We'll be looking closely at the firearms protection order legislation that's before the Select Committee at the moment to make sure that we've got all of the aspects of that right, and then we'll be looking at whether there are other things that we could usefully give the police, other legislative tools that we could usefully give the police that will help them. Now, I am not going to...
Seizures, Minister?
I am not going to get into the detail of that yet, Lisa, because I haven't literally only had this job a week, haven't had the opportunity to work through that, but we will do that. It is right at the top of the list, so we'll be aiming to move swiftly.
But if you are considering whether there are some holes that need to be plugged with new laws, you must generally know what areas you're looking at. So throw us a bone here. Are you looking at asset seizures in relation to gangs? Further powers.
What I'd say is I wouldn't rule out further changes in that area, but I'm not going to get into the specifics of what is or isn't, on the table at the moment until we've had a chance to work through that properly.
How are you going to measure success then if you're saying that gang violence and crime is one of your top priorities? How will you know that, you've done good?
Look, I think we can record statistics. We do have statistics around violent crime and so on, and so that's clearly one of the indicators that we've got. I think the number of incidents that we're seeing around gang-related activity makes it very clear to the community that there is more activity out there, and so more needs to be done. And I think we can absolutely take that on board. We absolutely do need to be doing more.
So, Minister, that's important. Will you measure your success as Police Minister against whether those crime statistics rise or fall?
Look, I absolutely appreciate the limitation of crime statistics. They are one indicator. So, yes, I think that they will be one of the indicators. There are others as well. The resolution rate, the amount of time it takes police to resolve the issues, all of those statistics are useful, but you need to consider the whole package of them.
Yeah, but if they go in the wrong direction, then have you failed as a minister?
Ultimately, one of my jobs as a minister is not to tell the police what to do. It's to make sure that they have the tools that they need in order to be able to do the job effectively.
So if those figures go in the wrong direction, will you have failed as a minister?
Oh, well, look, I'm aiming to get all those figures pointing in the right direction, Lisa. That's got to be the goal.
OK, so the Prime Minister, when she shuffled the portfolios, she said the narrative around the police portfolio had become distracting. What narrative are you aiming for, Minister?
Oh, look, I think that, some of the messaging got a bit lost in there, and I think that one of the things we do need to do is make sure that we've got right up at the top of the policing agenda these issues that New Zealanders are rightly concerned about, because we're seeing escalated gang tension. We've seen, some high-profile youth offending. New Zealanders want to know that they are front of mind for the government and that they are front of mind for the police. And so I absolutely want to give them that reassurance and make sure that those things are happening.
And that's the Police Minister, Chris Hipkins. For the fifth time in just 3 years, Israel is heading to the polls. Prime Minister Naftali Bennett has been unable to keep his coalition together, and after facing pressure for weeks, has decided he will step aside. He's submitting a bill to dissolve Parliament, and the Foreign Minister will take over as Prime Minister until another general election takes place. CNN's Hadas Gold reports.
Naftali Bennett. He was not supposed to be Prime Minister, at least not yet. But in 2021, his small party opened the door to a new government, one that ended Benjamin Netanyahu's run as the longest-serving Israeli Prime Minister. And with that, the high-tech millionaire became the country's 13th Prime Minister.
Naftali Bennett,
leader of the right-wing party Yamina, joining forces with unlikely bedfellows to form the most diverse coalition in Israel's history. Bennett, a kippah-wearing religious former settler leader, sitting alongside left-wing parties he once derided, and the first Arab party in a governing coalition.
we knew it was going to be hard. We knew that when you put secular and religious together, right and left, and Jews and Arabs together, there are going to be bumps in the road. But that's the challenge.
With so many diametrically opposed positions, the coalition agreed to avoid major changes on lightning rod issues, especially in regard to any move towards peace talks with Palestinians. But marking achievements elsewhere, passing the first budget in nearly 4 years, building out security alliances on the back of the Abraham Accord normalization agreements. Bennett becoming the first Israeli prime minister to visit the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain.
It's a government with many achievements in comparison to its short period and narrow parliamentary majority. What it didn't succeed to do is to rescue or extract Israel from its internal cultural identity warfare. And in this respect, this government was more of a ceasefire rather than putting an end to the political deadlock.
The grand experiment, barely 1 year old, crumbling, sending Israelis once again to the polls for the fifth time in just over 3 years.
Crowds of people gathered at Takaparawhau, Bastion Point this morning to observe Matariki and welcome the Māori New Year. Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei held an umu kohu kohu whetū, a traditional ceremony offering to mark the rise of Matariki. Matariki is the first public holiday steeped in Matauranga Māori to be recognised in Aotearoa. Our reporter Liam Brown was there.
It was a still but cold morning as whānau wrapped in warm jackets and blankets gathered at the historic Takaparawhau to bring in the new year. Today is the first day in most maramataka, the Māori lunar calendar, where it is the Tangaroa phase, which is when Matariki is visible, celebrations begin and umu kohu kohu are lit. Auckland City Councillor Al Filipaina spoke to the diversity scene at this morning's celebrations.
It was just so moving. You had people from different walks of life, different cultures, and Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei made them all feel welcome.
As the morning went on, the clouds cleared, showing a dawn sky full of stars, with Matariki sitting on the horizon. Clouds of steam rose from the umu as the sky opened as an offering to the stars, with the umu itself containing kai in correspondence to the stars. Te Kura Taiaho of Ngāti Whātua explained what kai was used in the umu, which was lit before daylight.
We got some kumara to represent all of the kai that comes from the earth. Hei, chicken to represent tupuarangi. We got a tuna for waiti for representing kai that comes from fresh water. And we got a big hiko to represent waita food from the sea.
Many po and te ao Māori have passed away in the last year, and for Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei especially, one of their most prominent kaumātua and leader of the Bastion Point occupation, Joe Hawke, died last month. He was buried not far from where the Umukohukohu Whetu took place on Takaparafo, the land he fought for that was returned to his people. Chair of the Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei Marama Royal read out the names of those who have passed since the last Matariki.
Ian Thompson, Joseph Parata.
Soon after the stars were fed by the steam, the masses gathered for a hakari to reflect, acknowledge the present and look to the future. Celebrations are being held around the country, with the official ceremonies being held on Friday.
A lot of you have been getting in touch about the health system. This listener says Andrew Little must go to the hospitals and visit the patients, ask what they are going through. He must sit on any ward and observe nurses and see how stressed they are, how much patient bells ring and wait for help, and wait for a nurse to come and bring a patient to the toilet. Even 2 years ago, it was hell being in hospital. After spinal surgery, my air bed shorted a wire and they left me sitting in a chair for 24 hours because there were no spare beds and because the budget wouldn't allow calling the repairman on weekend rates. Someone else says if the health system isn't now in crisis, then one hates to think what it will look like when it is. Andrew Little prefers under pressure, which aside from describing his own current state is a classic case of political spin. We're tired of spin, Minister. We want you to address the problem, not dig holes with semantics. Do something. Another person says this is what happens when people can't be stuffed wearing a mask, getting a COVID vaccine or flu vaccine. Whinge, and just blame the government. Meg lives in Rangiora and says if we need a doctor after hours, we have to use the 24-hour surgery in Christchurch. It's about 30 minutes away, says Meg, which is great if you can drive and useless if you can't. Another person says East Care was my closest after hours medical centre. It was shocking when it was forced to shut.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening. I'm Karen McCarthy. The Building Minister is backing what she calls a task force of industry experts to sort out the country's plasterboard shortage. Its members announced today include warehouse founder Sir Stephen Tindall and the Chief Executive of the Master Builders Association, Dave Kelly. Most of the local market is supplied by a Fletcher building subsidiary that hasn't been able to keep up with rising demand. Megan Woods says the task force has the right people for the job.
We're seeing action out of the ideas that these people are having. I want to bring them together into a task force so we can make sure that government is putting all the support that it requires around them so that we can make sure that our builders and people who are wanting to do work on their homes have plasterboard in the country.
Megan Woods says 28 containers of plasterboard are on the way to New Zealand. Parliament has passed legislation allowing people to get a fourth dose of COVID-19 vaccine. The Medicines Act has been amended to allow those deemed most at risk of getting very sick from the virus to get their second booster 6 months after their first. COVID booster shots can now be given off-label by a GP, meaning without a prescription. The booster won't be mandated and other vaccines are excluded from the changes. The Director-General of Health will confirm exactly who will be eligible for the fourth dose later this week. Exceptionally severe monsoon floods in northern India and Bangladesh have displaced millions of people. Dozens have been killed, many more are missing. Villages have been submerged, roads and homes destroyed and infrastructure wrecked. The BBC's Sachin Gogoi reports on the Indian situation.
Close to 5 million people have been affected in Assam. That's roughly the entire population of Ireland. And actually, there are a few other states in the neighborhood, Meghalaya, Tripura, Arunachal Pradesh, Manipur. Taken together, I think at least about 6 million people have been affected in that entire region. And this season only, about 130 people have been killed in floods and incessant rains so far.
The severity of the floods has sparked widespread debate in India and Bangladesh about the growing frequency of extreme weather conditions. 17 more people have died with COVID-19 and one was a child under 10. Today's toll is higher than the 7-day rolling average of reported deaths, which remains at 12. 9 of the newly reported deaths were in the Auckland region. The Health Ministry has also reported 5,630 new community cases. That's more than 750 up on the 7-day rolling average. 362 people are in hospital with the virus, 4 of them in intensive care or a high dependency unit. The Firefighters Union says staff shortages are forcing stations to close and leave people unprotected. Onehunga Station in Auckland was closed at the weekend for the 9th time this year. Union Secretary Watty Watson told Checkpoint it's not just happening in Auckland and Wellington.
It's happened in Dunedin, it's happened in Christchurch. We've had not enough crews in Gisborne. We've had trucks offline in Nelson. This is just becoming routine rather than extraordinary or exceptional.
Watty Watson says Fire and Emergency is failing to employ and retain firefighters. The local share market has had its best day in 3 weeks as investors' nerves regarding inflation and higher interest rates appear to have calmed. The benchmark NZX Top 50 index was positive through the day and closed 113 points or 1.1% higher. It's the market's best single session since the end of May after being knocked 4% lower last week. The session's bigger gains included restaurant brands, Fletcher Building, A2 Milk and Tourism Holdings. The number of rising stocks outnumbered the falling ones by more than 2-1. It's 6:04. Israel is set for its 5th general election in less than 4 years. The ABC's Alison Horn reports.
After months of instability within the coalition, Prime Minister Naftali Bennett has announced his intention to have Parliament disbanded within days with the support of the Foreign Minister Yair Lapid. Yair Lapid will become the acting PM until the October election and a new government is formed. The coalition has had a tenuous and troubled hold on power since it was formed just over a year ago.
Imports from China's Xinjiang province are due to be banned in the US from today as new rules come into force. Under the regulations, firms wishing to be exempted will have to prove imports have not been produced using forced labour. US officials have said members of the minority Uyghur community, who are predominantly Muslim, have been detained and made to work. China has repeatedly rejected accusations that it's holding Uyghurs in internment camps in Xinjiang. Several imports from the resource-rich region, including cotton and tomatoes, have already been banned by the US. In sport, Black Cap selector Gavin Larson is very happy with the depth of talent achieved in recent years as another 2 players are set to debut for New Zealand. Otago leg-spinning all-rounder Michael Rippon and Central District's wicketkeeper Dane Cleaver will play in upcoming white ball games against Ireland, Scotland and the Netherlands. Larson says that to balance player welfare, the player pool needs to be larger.
I look through these squads and, it's quite heartwarming to see the number of players who have donned the silver fern and who have actually done very, very well. And yet, some might still say that they're sort of fringe players.
Kane Williamson, Trent Bolt, Tim Southey and Devon Conway will all return to the side for the 3rd test against England, which starts in Leeds on Thursday night. First-time All Black Lester Faianga-Anuku admits he was starstruck when he joined the camp in Auckland today, but he's quickly fitting in with his new teammates. He's one of 6 new caps in the squad for the 3-test series against Ireland next month.
Play against them week in, week out here in New Zealand, but at the same time, you always have a beer from afterwards and reconnect. It's quite easy to be able to relate and have conversations with them, and that's the best part about it.
And the New Zealand men's 3x3 basketball team tip off their World Cup campaign against top-ranked Serbia in Belgium tonight. The Cup has not been contested for the past 3 years because of the pandemic. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Patrick Phelps from Minerals West Coast on the high-wage economy. If we wanted an Aotearoa, we better keep mining, he says. Tony Stamp samples the latest from Canadian musical weirdo Yves Jarvis. And in this week's Sci-Fi Sci-Fact, Matt Cowan on what's plausible about Quandia from the Wheel of Time series, a material that gets tougher the more you bash it. On Nights of me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight on Wednesday. Northland, cloudy periods with a few showers in the east. Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula, mainly fine, a few showers about Great Barrier Island and northern Coromandel Peninsula. Waikato to Kapiti Coast, including Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country, mainly fine, with a possible shower about Taihape and the Manawatu Ranges. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, showers gradually easing, clearing south of the Wairoa district tomorrow afternoon. Wellington and Wairarapa, a few light showers, clearing in the morning and fine breaks developing. Marlborough and Canterbury, mainly fine, areas of cloud possible about the coast. For the remainder of the South Island, fine apart from fog or low cloud in some valleys. It'll be frosty overnight, and the Chatham Islands often cloudy with a few showers. RNZ National, it's coming up to 6:08. We'll have headlines at past.
Nā mihi iho, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. In the US, the wait for parents wanting to vaccinate their young children is over. The Centre for Disease Control has authorised Moderna and Pfizer shots for children from 6 months to 5 years old. The coordinator for the White House COVID response says these vaccines could be available as soon as tomorrow. CNN's Dr. Sanjay Gupta spoke to one family who is ready to make vaccine appointments for their 2-year-old twins.
Twin brothers, Dean and Luke Kolozajak, are typical 2-year-olds. They like to climb.
Go, Luke, you do it?
Try to outrun their parents.
Hey, slow down!
And dig in the dirt.
Luke, are you going to be a gardener?
But their lives started out as anything but typical. Weighing just 2 pounds each when they were born.
They had respiratory issues and they had a brain bleed and some other health issues, so they were being fed through a tube, and then one of them was still on oxygen when they came home.
Just watching your kids struggle and fight for their lives in the hospital and hooked up to machines, it's just something you never want to see your children go through.
Dean and Luke spent nearly 6 months in the hospital before Jenna and John were finally able to welcome them home. That was December 2019.
Then we found out about the pandemic, and it was really scary. Really, really scary. We couldn't let people into our house. Friends, family couldn't come and meet the boys. They had to quarantine, they had to wear masks, they had to test.
Physically, socially, locking down ever since the early days of the pandemic in an effort to protect their children.
We can't control a lot when it comes to their health, but we can control exposing them to the coronavirus. Good job finding bugs.
For them, the decision is easy. They're going to be at the front of the line for the COVID-19 vaccine for little Dean and Luke.
This is going to hopefully help ease things into a more normal state, we hope.
But only 18% of parents with children under the age of 5 feel the same way. 27% of parents say no way. And about half of parents fall somewhere in between. One of the biggest reasons for hesitation is that kids aren't very likely to get sick or die from coronavirus, which is absolutely true if you compare rates to adults. But what if you just look at kids all by themselves? Since the beginning of the pandemic, more than 480 children under the age of 5 have died from COVID, and over 1,500 children and teens under the age of 18 overall.
When you compare COVID to other risks that children face, whether it's influenza or other infectious diseases, COVID can be quite serious. And so the right comparison isn't the child versus the elderly person. The right comparison is, how does COVID compare to other risks for which we vaccinate? And in that context, it's really not a close call.
To give more context, before vaccines in the 1960s, approximately 440 adults and children died every year from measles, 39 people from mumps, 17 from rubella. And yet, we routinely vaccinate against all these diseases. They are called vaccine-preventable deaths, one of the biggest triumphs of modern public health. It's also true Dean and Luke were born with pre-existing conditions, placing them at greater risk for severe COVID. And as many as 62% of all kids hospitalized with COVID had an underlying condition. But those underlying conditions are also widespread. 200,000 children with diabetes, 6 million with asthma, and 14 million children with obesity. Another concern of many parents is that the mRNA COVID-19 vaccines are new. Also true. So far, though, nearly 600 million mRNA COVID vaccine shots have been administered in the United States, and side effects have been rare. For John and Jenna, getting their boys vaccinated won't just be a relief, but a chance to live a life they felt was passing them by.
We were at my sister's house recently for their cousin's birthday, and they wanted to go inside and play in the playroom. And we're trying to tell our kids no, but they don't understand, and that's hard for us, it's hard for them, it's hard for our family. We've missed a lot of family holidays.
Yeah. The last 6-8 months, folks have been traveling, doing things, so it's almost we've been more detached from them because we've still been in the same bubble waiting for the boys to be able to get vaccinated.
And staying in the US, the House Select Committee investigating the January 6 riot is set to hear live testimony from 4 witnesses that will focus on how former President Donald Trump and his allies pressured state-level officials to overturn the 2020 election results. The committee will also show evidence that Trump was involved in a scheme to submit documents falsely stating that Trump and not Joe Biden had won their states in the 2020 presidential election. CNN's Jessica Schneider has more on what to expect.
The January 6th committee getting ready to shift its focus to Trump's role in a scheme to submit fake electors, all in a bid to overturn the 2020 election. They'll call 3 Republicans on Tuesday, all expected to testify about how Trump pressured them to overturn Trump's loss at the polls in their states. Georgia's Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger will talk about this phone call with the former president just days before January 6th.
All I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have.
Raffensperger's chief operating officer, Gabe Sterling, will also appear. And from Arizona, the Republican Speaker of the state's House will testify as well. Rusty Bowers said Trump asked him directly to replace the electors in the state with a rogue slate.
I talked to him a couple of times. And they had asked me to take some steps that I just wouldn't do, and I told him I voted for him, I've campaigned for him, but I told him I wasn't going to do anything illegal.
Bowers also received emails from Ginny Thomas urging him to set aside Biden's election win by replacing Democratic electors with a Republican slate. The committee has asked Ginny Thomas, the wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, to testify. Ginny Thomas issued a short response to a conservative publication saying, "I can't wait to clear up misconceptions. I look forward to talking to them." Thomas was the only justice to vote against releasing White House records to the committee in January. Now, Schiff says Thomas should recuse himself from any future cases involving the committee.
Justice Thomas, to avoid even the appearance of impropriety, should have nothing to do with any cases relating to January 6th, particularly regarding our investigation.
A new poll out from ABC News after 3 hearings shows nearly 6 in 10 Americans believe former President Trump should be prosecuted. It's a case the committee is making.
The president is guilty of knowing what he did, seditious conspiracy. What we're presenting before the American people certainly would rise to a level of criminal involvement by a president.
But so far, DOJ refusing to comment, though prosecutors recently complained that the committee's refusal to hand over all of its records complicates their job. Committee member Zoe Lofgren says the dispute could be resolved as early as July once the hearings conclude. And meanwhile, Schiff is leaving the door open to subpoena Vice President Mike Pence.
There are still key people we have not interviewed that we would like to. We're not taking anything off the table in terms of witnesses who have not yet testified.
And it is 16 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Russia is threatening retaliation after sanctions were imposed on one of its external territories. European Union member Lithuania is blocking the transport of goods into Kaliningrad as part of the sanctions against Russia for the invasion of Ukraine. The Kremlin says the move is unprecedented and has promised to take action to protect its national interest. The ABC's Matt Banford reports.
At this shopping centre in the Russian exclave of Kaliningrad, locals are stocking up on supplies. Wedged between Lithuania and Poland, Kaliningrad is about 1,200 kilometres from Moscow. The territory relies heavily on Russian imports coming by rail, but that's now been stopped. Lithuania has banned the transit of Russian coal, metals and construction materials, enforcing EU sanctions for the invasion of Ukraine.
The news shocked me. Thank God we've been able to buy some goods and household appliances at affordable prices.
The ban is expected to impact around 50% of the territory's imports. It's left many of Kaliningrad's 500,000 residents feeling anxious. Maybe prices will grow or there'll be no goods that we're used to, this woman says. To be honest, I haven't really thought about it yet, but this is all bad news. Kaliningrad is a vital strategic outpost for Russia, home to warships and submarines of its Baltic fleet. Dr. Leonid Petrov is a politics and business expert and visiting fellow at the Australian National University.
About 80 battleships and submarines harbored in Kaliningrad. So supplies is significant for Russia, and as the Kaliningrad is also a populated area and also used to be the trading hub in the middle of Europe.
Presidential spokesman Dmitry Peskov says the Kremlin will have to respond.
The decision is indeed unprecedented. It violates everything. The situation is more than serious, and it requires a deep analysis before we announce measures and decisions.
With Russia even more isolated, Dr. Leonid Petrov says Europe is in a precarious position.
The situation is quite combustible, understanding that's not only, the air links with Kaliningrad. Now it became much significantly complicated.
But Ukraine's allies are standing firm. At a summit of Central and Eastern European leaders, Lithuania's President Gitanas Nausėda lashed out at Russia's regional aggression.
Baltic countries, differently from many other countries of European Union, didn't have any illusions about the true attempts and ideas of Russia. Russia will not change.
As fallout from the war in Ukraine continues to grow, Dr. Leonid Petrov believes there's a real chance of Russia expanding its invasion, and the former Soviet states could be in its sights.
Putin might look at Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia as potential targets for Russian invasion, and there will be a big question whether NATO is going to be ready to protect those lands.
As the energy crisis bites in Eastern Australia, there's growing interest in battery solutions for renewable energy. With ageing infrastructure and skyrocketing prices, the climate is ripe for a focus on storing renewables so that they're ready to be dispatched during peak demand. So how much progress is Australia making towards building large-scale batteries and other storage infrastructure? The ABC's David Sparks takes a look.
Like any big piece of infrastructure, building a large-scale battery system isn't easy. But every time you build one, you get better at it.
Yeah, you learn an incredible amount. I think key to us is staying involved in the day-to-day operations.
Sam Hill is Head of Asset Management and Major Projects at Edify Energy, which already has a 25-megawatt battery system linked to a solar farm operating in country Victoria. But now it's secured finance to build a 150-megawatt battery project in the Riverina region of New South Wales.
Yeah, look, the project's going really well. In terms of construction, we're at the very early stages. We've done a lot of the design and procurement up front.
Edify's Riverina battery project has approval from the Australian Energy Market Operator and should be working by early next year.
This project is demonstrating that batteries can provide that critical system strength service, which one day will allow us to operate a 100% renewable battery grid.
And Sam Hill believes it's only a matter of time before individual battery facilities grow larger than 1,000 megawatts.
Our 150 megawatt battery is only sort of on a footprint about 200 metres by 100 metres. So it wouldn't be a huge facility to have a gigawatt scale battery storage project. I think within 5 years, we'll definitely have a gigawatt scale storage project in Australia.
Battery projects are in the pipeline all over the country, but are they coming online fast enough to fill the sort of reliability gaps exposed in the last few weeks? Maria Petrovic is a market analyst and founder of the firm Energy Synapse.
But in terms of big batteries, there's over 100 of those under development as well. And they're at different stages of development. Of course, not all of those projects will proceed to construction because at some point or another in their feasibility, they'll be found to be unfeasible because of certain site conditions. But I mean, we've got more in the pipeline than we actually need. So it's about figuring out how to unlock that investment.
The Smart Energy Council, which is the peak body for the solar, storage and smart energy management industry, says good progress is being made on large-scale community and household batteries. However, Chief Executive John Grimes says the current crisis shows more work is needed.
We need an urgent build program to build as much storage on the network as possible. We should be talking about a renewable energy storage target, actually setting a target and having the mechanism of government and the energy planners swinging in behind that to build energy in a coordinated way, deliver it at the cheapest price, but as quickly as possible.
That's John Grimes from Australia's Smart Energy Council, ending that report from David Sparks. The founder of a sports news website which covers LGBT athletes has slammed the decision of swimming's world governing body to ban transgender athletes from women's events unless they've transitioned by the age of 12. FINA made the decision following controversy over swimmers who were born male, transitioned, and then went on to win women's races. Outsports founder Sid Ziegler told the BBC the move is a backwards step.
A major blow to the inclusion of trans women in women's sports when the IOC and the NCAA decided to allow different sports governing bodies to determine the eligibility of trans athletes in their sport. They opened sports up to this, where sports like rugby and swimming will essentially ban trans women outright from the female category. And you're going to have other sports find different ways. Cycling last week said that 2 years of hormone therapy is enough to compete in cycling. So this is chapter number 17 in a story that is going to have another 300 chapters before we're done with it.
The World Athletics President, Lord Sebastian Coe, has hinted that his sport could follow swimming in banning trans women from elite female competitions. He says World Athletics welcomes FINA's move and it's set to discuss adopting new eligibility policy.
If it's a judgment between inclusion and fairness, we will always fall down on the side of fairness. That, for me, is absolutely, it's non-negotiable. And the integrity of women's sport is really, really important here. We will follow the science on this, and if we think there are events or distances or disciplines that are being unfairly impacted, we will, of course, look at those again in the light of that science.
Sebastian Coe, President of World Athletics. Thailand is undergoing a boom in marijuana-related businesses. It's a striking turnaround for a country that until recently would lock up hundreds of foreigners a year on drugs charges. But now that the government has fully legalised the use of marijuana and released thousands of prisoners, as the BBC's Jonathan Head reports, cannabis cultivation has taken off.
The cannabis craze is sweeping Thailand.
See how beautiful it is?
This is the country's health minister, the architect of what's now one of the most liberal marijuana regimes anywhere in the world. Being cheered by enthusiastic locals who hope that this green gold will bring them new wealth. It is an astonishing turnaround for a country that still has some of the toughest punishments for drug use.
We have already destigmatized these products from being narcotic. People, when they have access to this cannabis industry, they will not go to the dark side. They will only focus on how to make a better living.
Already, cannabis is being offered in a mind-blowing variety of forms. The official view is that this should all be for medical or therapeutic purposes. That's what the government is promoting to tourists. They want people coming to Thailand to get well, not high. In practice, though, the new law makes pretty much anything from the marijuana plant, however potent, legal.
I am happy, really happy. Now villagers like us can grow it legally. We no longer have to hide.
Even what's perhaps Thailand's most famous product, its cooking, has been caught up in the craze.
There's actually an old tradition here of putting marijuana into quite a few recipes, including the dishes in front of me here, which the government would like to tap into as it pursues its goal of turning Thailand into a marijuana hub. But can it do that without an explosion in recreational use, something the government doesn't want to happen? Any doubt that it can.
So what happens in here, Nan?
We're mostly focusing on CBD flower strain, so we're...
Nan Chitchop is a marijuana enthusiast.
Super exciting. Today is such a big win, I think, for, all stoners in Thailand.
So is it
She's also the daughter of a powerful local politician who's backing cannabis cultivation in this poor rural region of Thailand. Nan plans to help local farmers with her know-how. She's not convinced that the government's focus on medical use is realistic.
We all know from studying, other markets that recreational is where the money's at. So I think this is a good step towards that if we're really thinking of this as an actual economic crop.
Even though the government says it's strictly for medical purposes, it's not for recreational.
I hope that they see the potential, economics of it, and hopefully that will aid with the legalization of recreational use.
This really feels like a new age for Thailand. Just a month ago, possessing this much marijuana might have got you 15 years in jail. Today, anyone can cash in on the weed bonanza. And with just a few restrictions, enjoy consuming it too.
And let's get to some of your final thoughts before we head off for the evening on firefighters. This person says, I'm wondering what effect the shortage has on house insurance. If the Remuera station is covered by an aerial, which is too large to drive through our narrow streets overloaded with parked cars, how can the insurance industry be agreeable to that? Willie from Waiheke says, check out how they do it in Germany. Before they can apply to join the fire service, they need to be qualified as a builder, plumber, mechanic. Guess who maintains the property and the machinery? Think of the money that would save. Maybe enough to employ the needed numbers, says Willie. Another listener has got in touch to say, I recently spent time in hospital for an acute event. I was well looked after by caring nurses, doctors and other healthcare professionals. Not once did I come across a journalist or a National Party MP. It was a very reassuring experience. I'm glad you are on the road to recovery, it seems. Emily says, health and FENS, I am keen for there to be a measured conversation on tax. The countries with the best social services pay way more tax, especially the high earners, but they accept this as part of a social contract. Sue says, why don't you address the fact that there are so many health professionals that are not vaccinated? This is disgraceful and an important reason why there is a lack of staffing. So we have actually done several stories on that issue and interviews. Another person says our building cost per metre is one of the highest in the world. Fletcher's is a major thorn to us all. That's about all we've got time for. Stay tuned to the late news. They're going to keep you updated throughout the night. If you missed anything on the program, you can check Checkpoint out again on Spotify, Apple or wherever you get your podcasts from. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi pōpō. Tomorrow from 5 a.m, Wairarapa MP Kieran McAnulty joins the early birds at First Up to get some tips ahead of his attempted world record 26-hour interview this weekend. That'll be riveting. 26 hours worth.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Fletcher Building has assured the Building and Construction Minister it won't enforce its GIB trademarks for at least a year amid a national shortage of plasterboard. Parliament has passed legislation allowing people to get a fourth dose of COVID-19 vaccine. The Firefighters Union says staff shortages are forcing stations to close and leaving people unprotected. And a senior economist says rock-bottom consumer confidence rings recession alarm bells. Those are the headlines. Our next news is at 7.
This Friday, the stars align on RNZ National as we mark Matariki with a special music celebration.
Join us, Cara and Mark, for an afternoon with an array of interviews, performances and fresh waiata from some of Aotearoa's favourite musicians, including LAB, Dave Dobbin, Anna Corrington, Wana Maniapoto and Choi King